Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving into something absolutely fascinating. We're taking a journey through an ancient piece of literature that maps out a remarkably relatable, deeply human experience. We're going to explore this intense emotional evolution, starting from a place of deep, overwhelming distress, and traveling all the way to a state of absolute restful peace. It's a wild ride, so let's unpack the structure of this text together. Okay, let's dive right into this. Our primary source material for today is Psalm 4, and we'll specifically be using the English Standard Version. We're going to break down this text verse by verse. We'll be looking closely at the structure and even some hidden gems in the footnotes to understand exactly how it navigates conflict, anxiety, and ultimate resolution. But before we get lost in the ancient words, I want you to take a second and really think about your own life. Seriously, how do you typically respond when you are in major distress or when someone attacks your personal honor? We've all had those awful sleepless nights, haven't we, where your mind is just racing and you feel completely overwhelmed by your circumstances? Well, keep that feeling of emotional turmoil in mind as we go, because this ancient text addresses that exact psychological state head on. All right, section 1, a plea for relief. If you look right at the top of the text, even before the actual verses begin, we get this incredibly cool introductory metadata. It reads, "To the choir master, with stringed instruments, a psalm of David." Now, this tells us something absolutely crucial. This wasn't just some private, hidden diary entry tucked away in a drawer. It was designed for a public, musical setting. Pointing out this hysterical context really grounds us. It reminds us that these lyrics were meant to be heard, sung, and felt by an audience. Right out of the gate in verse 1, it says, "Answer me when I call, O God of my righteousness. You have given me relief when I was in distress." You can instantly feel this powerful tension being established. The speaker is crying out in the middle of a present, active crisis, practically begging to be heard. But at the exact same time, they're anchoring themselves to the memory of past relief. They remember a time when they were helped before, and that sets a really rich emotional baseline for the rest of our explainer. Moving on to section 2, confronting shame and lies. Look at the raw emotion captured in this quote from verse 2. "O men, how long shall my honor be turned into shame?" Notice the sudden shift here. It's fascinating. The text pivots dramatically from addressing God in verse 1 to directly confronting human adversaries in verse 2. The speaker is feeling actively dishonored, like their reputation is just being dragged through the mud by other people. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is a tiny detail you might easily miss, footnote A. Our source text points out that "O men" can actually be translated as "O men of rank." Talk about a game changer. This completely shifts the flavor of the conflict. It shows us that the distress is deeply tied to social power dynamics. The people causing the speaker's shame aren't just random individuals. They're people with influence, status, and real power. The verse keeps the heat on, asking, "How long will you love vain words and seek after lies?" Salah. The attacks causing the speaker's distress aren't physical. They are entirely verbal and reputational. The adversaries are using vain words and lies. You really start to feel why the speaker's emotional state is in such a tailspin. Rumors, deceit, and empty accusations, these are the weapons being wielded by these men of rank. But look at how the speaker defends against this onslaught in verse 3. The psalmist asserts that the Lord has set apart the godly for himself, and the Lord hears when I call to him. Instead of fighting fire with fire or just trading insults, the speaker combats all those external lies by retreating to a place of absolute internal certainty. It's a profound mental shift toward the assurance of being heard and valued, completely regardless of the toxic lies being spread. Which brings us to section 3, processing anger in silence. What I absolutely love about this text is that it actually provides actionable psychological instructions for processing intense emotion. Let's walk through this step-by-step process laid out in verse 4. Step 1, be angry. And here, we've got to look at footnote B from our source. It reveals that the word for angry can also be translated as agitated. It literally gives you permission to acknowledge that agitation. Step 2, ponder in your own hearts on your beds. Take that frustration into private reflection. And step 3, be silent. It's a brilliant progression, isn't it? Feel the agitation, retreat to a quiet, private space, and let silence do the heavy lifting rather than lashing out at those men of rank. But the journey doesn't just end in silent isolation in your bedroom. Following that internal silence, verse 5 calls for a targeted, outward response. The text instructs the reader to offer right sacrifices and put your trust in the Lord. So, after processing the agitation internally on their bed, the individual is pushed to take these specific external and spiritual actions to continue moving purposefully out of their distress. All right, our final stretch, Section 4, True Joy and Peaceful Rest. Here, we reach the climax of the text's emotional arc. In verse 6, we encounter this really interesting perspective shift. The text states, "There are many who say, 'Who will show us some good? Lift up the light of your face upon us, O Lord.'" This highlights a much broader existential despair. The speaker is surrounded by many people who are just exhausted, cynical, and desperately searching for any sign of good in turbulent times. It's a highly relatable feeling of communal fatigue. And this brilliantly illustrates the massive contrast presented in verse 7. We're comparing two totally different types of fulfillment here. On one side, we have what the speaker personally experiences, more joy in my heart. On the other side, we have the many who only experience satisfaction when their grain and wine abound. The text draws a very sharp line, juxtaposing an internal, spiritual joy that sustains you in tough times against a purely external, material wealth that depends entirely on having a good harvest. Which brings us to the stunning conclusion, the absolute mic drop in verse 8. "In peace I will both lie down and sleep, for you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety." Think back to the start of the text. We began with a distressed plea, dealing with powerful men speaking lies, which led to a fierce agitation where the person had to go ponder on their bed in silence. Now look at how perfectly this resolves. That agitated tossing and turning on the bed has transformed into actual, peaceful, restful sleep. The external threat is entirely neutralized by a profound sense of safety. So, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought. Based on this ancient framework we've unpacked today, where do you find your ultimate peace and safety in turbulent times? Psalm 4 offers a truly remarkable blueprint for navigating from severe agitation to true, restful peace. I really hope exploring this structure gives you a new, helpful lens for processing your own challenging moments. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this text today, and whatever you're facing, keep seeking that peace,